Greetings, this is Greg. I wanted to do a brief talk today focused on our friend Joel Osteen. Um, the driver for this is that there's a recent um, issue with Joel Osteen and whether or not he was doing the Christian thing when it came to his behavior on opening up his church. Bonjour, Vigés, Sticks, and this is Greg. So what happened is that Joel Osteen was slow to open his church up to those in need during the hurricane. This has created some controversy because he talks a lot about being a great Christian, and his sermons really support operating well in this fashion. And the claim is he completely, did not follow through on this agreement. My take on this whole situation is that I think that Osteen is getting some criticism that kind of makes sense, but it's a little unfounded. So I wanted to make, perhaps there's a good and a bad side to this. Osteen sort of went through a number of arguments, including the flooding that occurred in their parking area of the church. I've been to the church maybe 50 or 60 times, and it is a huge facility. The parking area did flood, but there's a lot of elevation that gives the upper parts of the church a lot of clearance from water, so it wouldn't be that big a deal. They could take on as much as 20 feet of water and still have the main sanctuary, as well as a couple of floors of classrooms and so forth that could be used as facilities for people in need. So I want to say there are two perspectives here. The perspective is how things look from Joel Osteen's perspective, and the perspective is how things look from the desperate homeless folks who don't have any housing right now. From Joel Osteen's perspective, there are a few items here. Number one is if you have a church and it's successful, there are a number of issues that popped up during New Orleans. For example, inadequate bathroom facilities combined with people being raped in those bathrooms, etc., are among the kind of issues you don't have worked out well if the whole environment isn't properly structured. Unlike a place that has full-time everything, it's a church. So they have staff that's full-time, that's a skeleton crew, but becomes supplemented by volunteers whenever there are services, etc. So in general, when it comes to housing thousands of people and making sure that they're safe, well-fed, and cared for, that's a whole different level of initial volunteers and then hiring staff to address that. So I could see his perspective on an orderly process to getting his facility set to be accommodate all of these folks that are displaced. From the perspective of the other problem I see is that there's a challenge with who are you housing, because if you're handling criminals or folks, or if you're handling saints, you don't know what you have. So hence the quality of your staffing is really going to have to address that as well. On the flip side of this, I wanted to look at sort of the user standpoint. What Joel explained was that they opened up the church after the other facilities were full. My take on this was that if you couldn't evacuate the city, your home is under 10 feet of water, and you can't drive out, you're stuck in the city, homeless, no clothing, etc. I just think it's a godsend to have the church open sooner than later in order to provide housing and any other support that it can provide for those in need. So I do think there are two different perspectives here. If you look strictly from the perspective of needy residents who are desperate, one could argue that a church of Lakewood's wealth, along with Joel, should be doing everything they can to help the community that's in need. And so any slowness of activity, could be an inconvenience or possibly result in severe discomfort of those that are in need. And so I definitely could see and understand both sides of this argument. My take on the whole thing is that I think Joel and his church is awesome because of many reasons. One, Joel doesn't take a salary from his church. I believe his wife and brother do, but he only gets paid from his books and speaking engagements. Number two, he's a very generous church that is all about being supportive of the community on a very quiet basis in terms of economic and other support that they provide to those in need and those entities in need that have legitimate work that's excellent. Number three is that I think that Joel represents a touchstone of success that other folks really sort of question whether or not he's in it for the whole community or just himself. So my overall take on this thing is that it's unfortunate that Lakewood has been portrayed in a negative light. I do think Joel's a good guy. He has an excellent policy process, and he just does a bunch of things like diversity, like community support, like, they even have a Hispanic church there that they do that has thousands of people. So I just have a ton of respect for him, but I could definitely see the argument against. I suppose I wish the church would be more vocal about how they do help, because they do lend a hand to a lot of people in need, and it doesn't get highlighted enough. At any rate, this is Greg. Thanks for taking time out. Have a great day, and look forward to further conversation and feedback.